Australian superannuation assets totaled a whopping $3.0 trillion at December 2020, making it one of the most influential industries in driving positive change in the world through its investments. So how is the super industry helping to make the world a better place?
Hi, I'm Kate Webster. I'm a Senior Responsible Investment Analyst at Aware Super. I've been at Aware Super for about 2.5 years now. I've previously worked in the finance industry, but I've now become a responsible investment analyst on the basis of my passion for sustainability and climate change. I'm so looking forward to the conversation today because at the end of the day, we are investing and we are here for our members. So people like yourselves, and this is exactly why we are here.
Hey guys, my name is Brendan Tran. I'm 18 years old. I'm a pop and R&B artist from Southwest Sydney. I found investing not too long after my HSC year, just as another way to support my dream of becoming a recording artist.
Hi, my name is Monica. I'm 23 years old and in my final year of studying a Bachelor of Laws with a Bachelor of Social Science, majoring in criminology. I'm a bit of a social justice kind of person. I really like the outdoors and adventures. I'm not really the kind of person that normally is interested in finance or investment, but as I've moved out of home and had to jump into the real world where things cost money, I've been looking more and more into my future with money and with being able to support a sustainable environment and a world that we can all grow up in.
Hi, my name is Brooke Moorhead. I'm 23 years of age. I currently have 5 jobs, but 2 of which I own 2 small businesses. So one of them is called Treat Yourself, which is a healthy food company. And the other one is soon to be launching Sustainabags, which is a sustainable grocery bag range. So since finishing high school and moving into the different career paths, I really wanted to create something that helped the environment and also helped ourselves. And also with investing, since looking after my money, moving out of home to purchase my first home, that's become a really important factor in my life.
So Kate, first of all, what is responsible investment and what is an area of focus for super funds for responsible investments?
It's a good place to start. So responsible investment is really where consideration has been made to things other than what you'd find in the financial statements of a company. So for instance, you've probably heard of ESG, so environmental, social and governance. And these are all things that we really consider when we're thinking about responsible investment. So an example is under environmental, we may think, is a company polluting? Do they have high emissions? Are they using too much water? Are they using water badly? Or are they creating a lot of waste that they're not disposing of properly? Social, things that we think about under the social banner are really things about health and safety, about cultural heritage, Aboriginal rights, land rights. Modern slavery and human rights are all things that we consider under the social side. And under governance, it's really about, is a company being managed well? Is the board of directors acting in an ethical and a strong way? So these are all things that we consider under responsible investment. So I've given a few examples of the things that we do consider. There are some areas which are really key to us. So things that we think about a lot are modern slavery. There's a new act that's just been passed in Australia, which requires us to do this, but obviously this is really fundamental to ensure that people's human rights are being protected. Other areas that are really important to us, culture and diversity, and climate change is another big area for us to consider as well.
What is the difference between responsible investing and social economic investing?
So it will depend on who you ask, what they answer to that, but I will give you my response and how I think most people in superannuation will think about it. So responsible investment is really a spectrum, and there are different places on that spectrum. Responsible investment at a very high level can be just thinking about some of the ESG considerations before we make an investment. And that spectrum expands right through to where people are investing with a real purpose of making a difference or trying to improve or change things from a social perspective or through to impact investing. Socially responsible investment often within a superannuation context can mean that people are specifically excluding and choosing not to invest in things that may have a negative impact from an ethical perspective. So, for instance, it could be gambling, it could be alcohol, tobacco, fossil fuels, for instance, are other things that are often excluded from investment portfolios in socially responsible investment. So really, in the spectrum, it is generally the more ethical investment side of it.
So, Kate, do responsible investments really lead to better financial returns?
It's a really good question, and I think an element of it is it depends. I'll give you a couple of examples where there have been seen to be real financial improvements in returns. So culture is one of those things. Companies that have been shown to have a really positive culture have been shown to have higher financial returns. In conjunction with that, companies that have higher diversity have also been shown to have better returns. Now, those two things together are really important. So a better culture and higher diversity together are both really important in terms of returns. A couple of other examples that may actually may come to fruition over time. So if a company is a high polluter, for instance, and they keep breaching their emissions standards, eventually those companies are going to be fined, and that is going to have a fundamental impact on their bottom line financial returns. Another example will be climate change. At this point in Australia, we don't have a price on carbon. Other places in the world, there is a price on carbon. So those companies that are high emitters, they get charged for the emissions that they create. Here in Australia, we don't have that at the moment. However, when that is brought in, we are going to find that those companies that are high emitters are going to be the ones that have a real hit to their bottom line financial returns.
Thanks for that, Kate. That really helps with demystifying the whole process of investment. And in terms of doing that research to find what isn't actually in financial statements, do you know much about the process of how to figure out which companies are more responsible to invest in?
Yeah, it's a long process, and there are a range of different ways that we can do it. It does depend if the company is a publicly listed company on the stock exchange. They tend to have much better disclosure, and so we can get a lot of information from them. Obviously, the information you often get from them is what they want you to know about. And so that then does entail some forensic analysis, really trying to kind of read between the lines and work out, are they actually living the values they say they're living? If it's a private company, then we have much less information to go on. And so often it involves understanding industries, a particular industry. What are the risks? What are the ESG risks to that particular industry? And applying to that company. It also entails a lot of asking questions and knowing what are the right questions to ask. And that can be a pretty tricky process. Sometimes you do feel like you're doing forensic analysis on them.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much.
So for me, it wasn't until last year when moving out of home and buying my first place that I actually looked into my super and where my money was going to. Like I wanted it to go into renewable energy and making sure that companies that I'd put my money in were using it for a positive impact on the world. So for a younger person like myself, how do our super funds actually influence companies on these issues and adding a positive footprint on the earth?
Yeah. The influencing is a massive part of what our role is actually in responsible investment. So we have to create relationships which basically are over a really long period of time. Some of these relationships are built up over 5 years. When we have a relationship with a company, what that allows us to do is to have conversations with the board and with the senior management to ask those difficult questions. And if we don't agree with something that they're doing, is then using our power as an investor to try and help change and influence what they're doing. Sometimes we do this as a collaboration, so with other super funds as well. So we are a really collaborative industry because we know that as a collaboration, we have got so much more strength and power and ability to influence. So for instance, modern slavery, we have as a collaboration set up an investor group that is dealing and assessing modern slavery within companies. Another example of collaboration is Climate Action 100. So these are a group of investors around the world who, as a group, are working with the highest emitters. It was the top 100 emitters in the world. Now that's been expanded to, I think, about the top 130 emitters in the world. And we literally create these working groups where we have regular meetings with those companies, the oil companies, the coal-fired power station companies, the energy companies, to talk to them about what are you really doing about climate change. The other element of influencing is through our ability to vote at annual general meetings. So in annual general meetings, we have the ability to cast our vote relative to the number of shares that we own in that particular company. And that is really powerful, and it's something that we are seeing is getting a lot of traction here in Australia and overseas as well, in the ability of shareholders to influence change at a company.
It's crazy. I didn't realise that there was actually more to super, like when you were talking about modern slavery, like that's something that wouldn't actually come to my mind with super. So it's amazing to see what you guys are actually doing to create that positive change through all aspects of life. So that's pretty incredible.
And it's really interesting because, yes, there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes, but also we are really conscious of the people whose retirement savings we're investing for. So we really do listen to our members, and that's the superannuation industry as a collective. We really do listen to what's important to our members. And obviously we're investing your superannuation, your retirement funds, and we want to make sure that we are investing it in places and in ways that actually works for you as well. So it's really important for you to actually be engaged in your super and talking to your super fund as well.
So what are some examples of positive outcomes that Aware Super actually influence?
Yeah, and really that's really what it boils down to, isn't it? So I've talked about climate change, I've talked about Climate Action 100. This has been a real area of focus for us. And we have seen real changes within some of the highest emitters in Australia. We've seen companies reporting their emissions that they haven't done in the past. We've seen companies committing to reducing their emissions, setting targets and making those targets public. Other things that we have been very influential in is ensuring that companies are pegging their senior executives' remuneration, their pay and their bonuses to reducing emissions and to other climate change targets. So that's one way that I think we've been really influential. Another way has been on culture and influencing cultural change. I think most people will have heard about the Banking Royal Commission and some of the horrendous stories that came out of the Banking Royal Commission. The super funds, as soon as the Banking Royal Commission results came out, were literally there at the table talking to the banks, talking to the chair, talking to the CEO, talking to the board and saying, how are you going to change? How are you going to make things different and ensure that this is never going to happen again? Another cultural example is there was a particular company that didn't have a whistleblower service. We worked with this company over a number of years to say, there are scandals that have come out of your company. You do not have a methodology for your employees to report these in a safe way. And so they then subsequently put a whistleblower team in, a whistleblower line in that their employees were then able to phone. Other ways that I think we've been able to influence change is literally where do we direct the money to? So renewable energy, that's a way that we're really trying to increase, but also into those industries that are starting in the renewables. So storage, for instance, I know that we have invested money in some battery storage. Now that's a way that we are trying to encourage industries to grow as well. Another way has been affordable housing, and this is something that we've been really proud to be part of. We've developed a portfolio of properties which are then rented to people at a 20% discount to the rates in the area. And these are being offered to people who are not necessarily the highest earners. They're people who are often members of ours, so they are the nurses, the disability workers, paramedics, all essential workers who are most of our members. And often these are located near to their workplace, so it could be that it's half a kilometre away from the hospital that they work at as well. And I think from a quality of life and a positive social and also from a financial perspective, these are some of the really positive ways that we've been able to influence.
Amazing. It's really reassuring to know that when you're making those responsible investments, there's such a diverse impact that's being made. Do you have an example of something that could be done if a company isn't willing to make change or be held accountable?
Yeah, and that's a really important factor of what we do. The first port of call is engagement. If you haven't told somebody that what you think they are doing is wrong, then really you're not giving them an opportunity to change. As I've mentioned before, some of these things can take years. These can take 5 years of having the same conversation with different peoples within the organisation. That's always going to be our first port of call. Our last resort is going to be to effectively sell, to divest the company. If we truly believe that the company really knows what we think is wrong with them, what they are doing wrong, the damage that they are doing, and they're not willing to engage or they're not willing to make any changes, then we have to make the decision for the people who we are investing for, the members, yourselves, that it's really important that we're doing the right thing. And so we may then make a decision to actually divest and sell the company and to commit not to hold that company again.
Excellent. It's great to see that we're actually having our money put where our mouth is when it comes to keeping companies accountable for some amazing cultural changes.
What are super funds doing to reduce global emissions from what we've spoken about previously?
Yeah. And this is probably my favourite subject in the world, so I'll try and keep it brief. Superannuation funds across Australia have recognised that emissions and high emissions are going to be a thing of the past and something that we really, really do have to combat. We want to work with these companies. We want to work together as an economy to reduce emissions of the economy. This is not about getting rid of all these companies. This is about helping them to transition to a lower emissions future and a low carbon future. So again, a lot of engagement with companies that are the high emitters. The other thing that we need to do as an industry is to know what our own portfolio emissions are. So we have, at Aware Super, for instance, we have $135 billion invested. We need to understand what is the emissions profile of our entire investment portfolio. Because we then, when we know that, we can then set targets to reduce that. If we don't know what the baseline is, we can't reduce the targets. We may know where we want to get to, but we need to work out how we're going to get to in terms of reducing emissions. So that's actually something that we're doing internally at the moment, is we are working to try and work out what every single company or portfolio emissions are. And then from there, we're going to work out where we are going to be able to reduce the emissions.
Just quickly with that note as well, just for, say, normal people like us, what are ways in which we can help companies like yourself in moving forward and go along that path?
Yeah, I think there are 2 prongs to that. So one prong is you as an individual really can make a difference in your choices. You can make decisions in terms of transportation. You can make decisions in terms of flights, in terms of how you live, in terms of sustainability. The other way is that you, in terms of the companies that you invest in, the superannuation firms that you are becoming a member of, these are all ways that you can also have a real influence as well.
I guess we wanted to know, and the audience wanted to know, what are some of the physical impacts of climate change that super funds consider when investing?
This is a real emerging space, and I'm not going to pretend that we've got all of the answers. So we've all seen some of the physical impacts of climate change: bushfires, flooding, extreme weather events. So we've all seen these. And insurance companies and superannuation companies are really sitting up and saying, this is going to really impact the value of some of the investments and therefore all of our retirement savings. So this is a really important thing to consider. We recognise that we are investing, for instance, for your retirement is going to be in 40 years' time. So we're making long-term investments, and the real physical impacts of climate change are going to be really felt at that time. So these could be bushfire risks. This could be heat stress on buildings and infrastructure. It can be sea level rise. We're likely to have seen a permanent rise in our sea level by the time that you are retiring. And these are all really important things that we need to be thinking about when we're making investments, but also when we are looking after the investments as well. So when we're making investments, we need to understand and do an assessment on what do we think the physical impacts are going to be. So is a particular company literally on the edge of a sea? So are they going to be impacted by sea level rise? Or are they next to a river and likely to be flooded? If they are, can we help that company to adapt? Can we help it adapt to climate change and the impacts of climate change? If things are really extreme, we hopefully will make the decision not to invest in something, because at the end of the day, we need to be protecting people's retirement savings.
So I actually recently found out that the super fund that I was with was making investments that didn't align with my values. They were investing in fossil fuels and non-renewable energies. And it made me think, why wasn't my super diverting its investments into something else? Kate, do you have an explanation for why these super funds aren't necessarily jumping ship straight away and only supporting companies that are making a good choice for our future?
Yeah, and it is one of the most fundamental questions that we have to ask ourselves internally. And it, at face value, you would think, yeah, just sell them. You know what, get them out of the portfolio. And it would be lovely if we could do that, and if all of those industries would shut down safely, all of those workers would then move to new jobs in low carbon economies. Unfortunately, it is so much more complex than that. And essentially, we want to work with companies who are able to transition. We want to help them and work with them along the way to ensure that all of the workers in that industry are not left high and dry. We're seeing it with kind of the shutting down of coal mines, of coal-fired power stations, that we're finding there are whole groups of people who aren't necessarily going to find employment in that area again. And we want to work with those companies. If we immediately divest, we lose our seat at the table. We lose any influence and power that we have to work with that company and encourage better outcomes. So we will always try and work with industries to try, or particular companies, to try and help them to change. So a good example is an energy company that has traditionally been all in coal-fired power stations, but they have made a commitment, and there are a number of companies that have done this, they've made a commitment to shut those coal-fired power stations over a period of time and work with all of their workers to help transition them to different industries, renewable energy, for instance. So that's a way that we feel that we can actually influence better change. If we were just to divest out of companies, and we are seeing this in places, sometimes those companies don't just shut down, or those particular coal mines or those coal-fired power stations don't shut down. They get sold to less scrupulous investors and people who really won't necessarily care about the remediation. So when that does close down, ensuring that the biodiversity or the environment around it is actually preserved, or they may not care about worker safety. So that is not a good outcome for others. The one thing I would say is that we and at Aware Super and other super funds have said there are some industries that we really cannot see a path forward, that there doesn't seem to be a path to transition. There are some sectors, however, that we really do not see a future pathway forward for them, and thermal coal mining is one of those. We're seeing across the globe that there are declines in demand for thermal coal and for coal-fired power stations. So we've made the decision at Aware Super and a number of other superannuation funds who have said there is no future, there is no way that thermal coal is going to be a fuel of the future, and we therefore made the decision to divest from that.
Wow, it's so interesting to see that super actually has such a big influence on the choices that companies are making, and also helping with influencing some shifts towards some better options that are much better for our environment and our future as well.
It can be slow and it can be a long-term gain. It can be a long-term game. So it would be lovely to get instantaneous changes, but unfortunately that's just not the way industries work.
Yeah, it's just such a interesting way of hearing like that different perspective of how you guys are not just divesting out of it, it's actually trying to create that change. Like for us, you think, oh, why can't they just pull out? But really like hearing that perspective, you're actually trying to make that change in that company. And if you do see where there is no clear pathway for that, then making that decision. So yeah, it's great to know the different aspects of how you make that decision.
Yeah, I had no idea you guys had such a wide contribution to impacts on the future of just everyone in general. Yeah, I think that was so amazing.
Yeah, it's great to see how that cultural shift as well. It's also unearthing that for long-term super investment, it doesn't make sense to invest in companies that are not going to align with our values in 10, 20 years when we want to see a greener future for our kids. So it's good to see that we're also potentially going to have some better investments with more environmentally responsible companies.
And we're certainly trying to invest in line with what our targets are for reducing our portfolio emissions. So companies have to align to our values for us to be able to continue investing with them for the long term.
Thanks a bunch for joining us. And if you want to learn more about super, head over to Aware Super in the marketplace for some videos and quizzes.